Arthur Sinodinos, good morning, welcome.
G'day Barry, always good to see you.
What do you say explains what was really a break with tradition, I think, the election of the coalition government for a third term?
Well, Barry, you have to remember that economic conditions have been very good in New South Wales. Unemployment's been down, growth has remained high. The infrastructure program that the Berejiklian government's undertaken has been a very significant and very important one, albeit a lot of it is still to actually be finalised or completed, but it's very much in the works. And I think people could see that the government is fair income, or was fair income, that it has integrity, and that off the back of a very good economy, good economic management. And here we have to pay tribute to people like Barry O'Farrell, who laid the basis of this victory by the way they reformed administrative processes when we came into government in this state in 2011. So they're seen as a competent government which was able to manage the economy. In fact, Barry, there are quite interesting parallels with the Victorian outcome, where I think part of the reason, a major part of the reason Daniel Andrews won was because he was running in a strong economy with a strong infrastructure program, and he was seen as having kept his promises. And I think the same happened here in New South Wales, notwithstanding some pretty significant headwinds.
Yeah, except though in New South Wales the one difference around infrastructure is there's a lot going on, but not a lot has been finished.
Well, that's because they're very big projects, and what Gladys now has is 4 years in which to complete projects and for the electors of New South Wales to see the results. So this was a very important election for her to win. It's given her the breathing space to bring these projects in, and that sets up the Liberals in New South Wales for the next election very well, I believe.
All right, might set the Liberals up. What about your coalition partners, the Nationals? Now, there's no sugarcoating it. They suffered a couple of very big swings, 20% plus in a couple of places. Do they really have to take a good look at themselves? Well,
whenever any party has seats lost and all the rest of it, you do have to take a look at yourselves. The National Party in New South Wales, though, did deliver a lot of money for the bush, but I'm not sure that people in the bush felt that it was too little too late. This is the dilemma that we face. You can promise a lot of things, but it's whether there's a perception that things have been allowed to run down for a long time and that too much is happening too soon towards the end. So I think we have to look at the results and see if it was access to services and infrastructure and all the rest of it, how do we make sure the bush gets a better deal? In some ways, there's an analogy here with what happens in Indigenous policy, where 3% of the population are Indigenous. We spend a certain amount of money, but because they don't have as strong a voice as other parts of society, they don't necessarily get what they properly should get. And I think the bush partly has suffered from that, even though the National Party has been a strong proponent of the bush for, the last 50, 60 or 80 years.
But it seems as if there's a view that they didn't have a handle on water management, they didn't have a handle on the fish kills. And you'd have to concede that the personality conflicts within the National Party haven't been helpful either. Not that the Liberals can lecture them on that.
On the policy front, the water issue is not just a Nationals issue, it's an issue for the country as a whole, with the Murray-Darling Basin Plan in particular. And it's very clear that we have to, across the political divide, just focus now on implementing a plan which clearly prioritises having enough water available, not only for environmental reasons, but also to make sure that the economic and social condition of the communities that rely on the Murray-Darling Basin is helped and enhanced. In relation to personality conflicts, well, let me make it very clear. Scott Morrison, Josh Frydenberg, Arthur Sinodinos, for what it's worth, and all the other members of the Liberal National Coalition, in my view, backed Michael McCormack as the leader to go into the election. He's earned his spurs. He's fighting hard every day in there. I follow his Twitter feed. He's all over the country announcing projects. He's indefatigable. He's had to establish a profile from a low base. That is true, but he's establishing that profile. And I think it's important for all National Party members to get behind McCormack as we go into the home stretch.
And Barnaby Joyce, at the state level, his own national colleagues had to tell him to shut up halfway through the campaign.
Look, Barnaby is a marketing dynamo, but he needs to channel that constructively.
Do you think he's still a marketing dynamo?
I think, notwithstanding what has happened to him in recent years, the fact of the matter is he does go out there and speak in plain terms. And what I'm saying is that we should encourage that, channel that, and make sure it's being used to the greater good of the coalition. That's why Scott Morrison appointed him as an envoy on the drought, to give him that particular responsibility to help channel him constructively into the work of the government.
How much of a boost do you really think this is, though, for the coalition federally? Do you think that the Prime Minister got a bit excited last night when he said that they'll be back celebrating shortly?
Look, it was definitely a morale boost for all of us in New South Wales, and I think for the federal party more broadly, because it showed a government that's managing a strong economy, is delivering infrastructure, and is getting on with the job of meeting the needs of people in the broad, the great mainstream out there, will ultimately be rewarded.
But you know, as a strategist, you look at the map as a whole, and New South Wales is not as rich in marginal seats as Victoria and New South Wales. That's where you still need to do a lot of work.
Well, in Victoria, the Prime Minister's been back there a lot, announcing new infrastructure projects, seeking to convey the government's message, and there'll be more in the budget around infrastructure which will be relevant to that. And the same in Queensland. In Queensland, we've sought to take a pro-development stance and marry that up with extra infrastructure to capitalise on the economic developments that are possible.
One nation preferences. It does appear as if you're about to, or at some point in the cycle, in some seats you'll prefer one nation ahead of the Greens and Labor. Would it be right about that?
Well, those matters on the ground will be decided closer to the actual election. The Prime Minister has made it clear that his view is there should be no deals done.
That's a different thing altogether, though, than preferences.
And my point is that our focus at the moment is, between now and the election, how do we get people to vote for the coalition, to put the coalition number one? So I'm looking at Labor voters, Green voters, One Nation voters, etc., and saying, how do we get them across the line to accept the government's message and vote for us? I think preferences is an interesting issue, but it's a subsidiary issue to the issue of maximising our vote. The important thing for us, Barry, is to get our vote into the 40s, to get that first preference vote as high as we can, and use that as a base to counter Labor and the Greens, because the Labor and the Greens will work together. Their preferencing of each other will be very tight. And we also have to be very conscious that these issues play out differently in different parts of the country. What works in Victoria does not necessarily work in Queensland.
Yeah, so you will cherry-pick this. So in some places you will put One Nation ahead of Labor and the Greens because you want to win the election.
What we will do is we will repudiate any party which stands for stuff that is outside the mainstream, and that includes the sort of racism or Islamophobia that some parties, including One Nation, have been out there talking about. And we will be saying to people who might be tempted to vote for a fringe party like that, don't vote for them, vote for a mainstream party which is putting the economy first and is trying to bring all Australians together.
Colin Barnett in WA warned the Liberals only a week or so ago that if you do this, you can drive votes to the Labor Party. He had that first-hand experience in WA and said it cost him 6 seats.
And Tim Nicholls in Queensland would argue that he had a similar experience. So that tells you that strategists on the ground have got to take into account a number of layered considerations. Yes, there are the local considerations. There are also the considerations about how does preferencing one party over another impact on the brand of the party as a whole.
But it's not only a strategic consideration here, there's a moral consideration. And what you're saying, you can apply a certain moral standard in Victoria and a different moral standard in Queensland.
And what I'm saying is part of the consideration of these things is how does it even impact the brand of a party? And the brand of a party goes to its values and beliefs and covers off on what you're talking about. And the party of Menzies, the party of the individual, the party which stands against identity politics and picking on people because of their colour, race, gender or ethnicity, the same party which negotiated the deal with Japan in 1957 on the trade treaty at a time when memories of the war were still very raw in this country. That's the sort of lens we have to bring to all these things.
And just finally now, it appears as if the budget is going to be more important than ever, and what you will need is not only to be able to forecast a budget surplus, but a convincing and considerable one.
There will have to be a budget surplus, and I believe we're on track for that. There will also have to be, I think, tax reductions. We've promised a certain schedule of tax reductions. It'd be good to go ahead with those, because don't forget, when the ACTU and others are out there talking about we need a wage increase of X, That's a pre-tax wage increase. You can get an equivalent effect through a proper tax cut for low and middle income earners. So we'll be saying, until our policies kick in to help lift wages even further, the way to do this is through tax cuts focused on low and middle income earners.
Thank you for your time this morning. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Barry.